Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. What I want to do in this episode is go through a step-by-step process that's very opinionated, that makes sense for me and will make sense for you if you want to get a job as a software engineer outside of really big tech companies. If you want to get a job at Google, Meta, Netflix, or one of the top tier tech companies in the United States, I might not be your best resource, and we'll get into that. But if you want to go for the other 99%, I'm going to break down a step-by-step guide about what I would be doing, what I would be building, and how I would be going about it to break it down as simple as possible. And the way I usually do this is reverse engineering my path and making sure that I have the right advice at the right time. So before I get into that, I want to talk about the number one problem that you have as a person learning to code, trying to become a software engineer. You have too much advice, and most of it is not good. And how do you tell what's not good from what's good? Let me break it down. So for me, when I'm looking at people giving me advice, I'm thinking of a couple criteria they must fill. One, are they in a position that I want to be in? Two, do they have a work history that supports their claims? If the answer to both of those questions is no, then I'm likely not going to take their advice. Does this work 100% of the time? Of course not. You don't have to have a career that I want to have in order for you to have really good advice. You also don't have to have worked at that many places to have really, really good advice. But it's more likely that you will if you meet those two criteria, right? So I'm not in the business of like playing around with my own future. I don't want to waste months or years of time studying stuff that's not going to help me out and then find out later I shouldn't have done that. So that's what my criteria is. Are you in a position that I want to be in? Meaning I want to work at probably a startup or a fast-paced company. It's a mid-sized company. I don't want to go work for a really big, large company. It's just not something I want to do. I see I have the most impact at smaller companies and fast-growing startups. So I want people that have worked in those kinds of environments to tell me what are some of the projects I should be building in order to get into those kinds of places. So if I'm looking for advice, I'm probably not going to go look for the dude that worked only at Netflix and only at Google. Same thing for you. If you're looking to become a software engineer and you want to work at those places, please go follow those kinds of people, because I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly how to do that at all because I've never done it. So how could I give you advice on doing that? Now, have I made it to the interviews at those places? Yeah, but I didn't pass them, and I didn't really want to go into them in the first place. So I'm really not the source of truth that you should be using if that's your goal. Now, here's a more controversial one, the work history part. I see a lot of people on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram that have really never worked anywhere, or they've worked like one job for maybe a year, and they end up teaching people how to code or talking about career stuff, and they've never really done any of that stuff. Now, are they wrong? No, I've actually heard some really good advice from some people out there. In fact, there's some really big accounts out there that haven't really worked many places that have excellent advice. But I do see sometimes that some of the advice they give seems more conceptual than based in reality. Now, I've job hopped around and gone to about 7 different companies at this point in my career. I'm probably going to go to another 7 in the future. Is this a great path for me? It wasn't really a path I chose. It's just the reality of the market that I've been in, and also my own desire to grow at a really fast rate. I went from junior, senior, to manager, to senior engineering manager, now back to senior engineer at a fast-growing startup. Have a kind of an interesting work history, but also one that is actually not that unique. If you look at most software engineers, they tend to have a work history that looks like mine. 2 years here, 2 years here, 5 years here, 7 years here, 1 year here. And they're usually not at companies you've ever heard of. Most of the companies you'll see on my resume, you may have heard of 1, maybe 2 of them. The other 3 or 4, you've never heard of in your life. That's the case with most software engineers. We work at places that are not massively publicly traded tech companies. Work at no-name startups, small businesses with 50 or so employees. That's actually where the majority of software engineers spend their careers, not at Google, Meta, or Netflix. So if that kind of experience resonates with what you're trying to do or the reality that you see yourself embarking on, maybe you should listen to me because I kind of know what I'm talking about in that way, right? Anyway, this is not about like me or why I might be a good source of truth or not. It's just about how you can determine whether or not the advice that you're getting is stuff you should actually listen to, because there's so much of it out there nowadays. You have to be very careful, especially if you're using that advice to try to get into a career, right? Because why would you want to go and listen to one person versus the other and change with the wind, which will just lead you into this vicious learning loop where you're not going to learn anything and just become one of those Swiss Army knife developers that knows a little bit of everything really poorly and then not have the outcome, which is a job after a year or two of studying. Now, next, here's how I approach actually acquiring the skills. I want to get a North Star project. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show. Now, let me be clear. Learning how to code is not easy. It's even harder now with so much information about how you should be studying, what you should be learning, and the reality of the job market. Getting a job requires an entirely different skill set than learning how to code. You need both to succeed. At Parsity, we work with you one-on-one in a very small setting. We will only take 60 people per year to coach them from zero through hired. The reality is, if you're a career changer, you need that personalization to help you with your individual problems and your local job market. If you want to work with me and my team, go to parsity.io. If you want more information, just schedule a call with me by clicking on the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode. So I want a project that represents the skills that I'll need to master. For software developers, which we'll get into, this will be a full stack app with authentication, a database, a responsive front end, a secure, scalable web app, and a publicly available URL. That's it. That's actually all you need to build to become a full stack web developer. And by all, that's a lot. And we're going to get into every step in just a minute. So step one, you're going to start with JavaScript. When I first started learning to code, I didn't know what I was doing. I went from course to course. I was trying to figure it all out. And I just stuck with JavaScript, which was probably the best move I could have done. Why JavaScript? It's the most versatile, widely used programming language in the world. So whether you're working on the front end, the back end, mobile apps, JavaScript is going to come into play. You just must know JavaScript. You're going to have to learn it either now or you're going to have to learn it later. Learn it now. It's going to make your learning life much easier. If you learn something like Python, that can be pretty simple too to get started with. Ruby, same thing. But all these things are going to have to interact with JavaScript at some point. Use JavaScript now. It'll make your life so much easier. Here's how to approach it. You want to master arrays. This is the very first thing you want to understand how to do. So you need to learn variables and objects and true, false, and if-else statements and all that stuff. But really, by the end of your learning, you should learn how to manipulate arrays and objects and access properties in objects. You should learn how to work with APIs to fetch data and display it from a public API. And then you should be able to build a basic app, create a simple form. So create a little nice form, and that form should be able to submit some data and display the response after submitting that data. So maybe you make like a really janky social media app, like a fake one, like a single page social media app where a user can type in a comment and maybe add a picture and then put like their name or something on it. And then that would append to the page. So every time they click submit, that little comment and the image would add to the page or something like that. That could be a nice first project. Then you could do something like go to typocode.com and look for one of their quote unquote fake APIs and learn how to display a list of users or a list of to-dos, and then learn how to manipulate those to-dos. What happens if a person checks them off? If you have a list of to-dos and somebody checks it, will the to-do disappear? Will it be marked as done? Something should happen. This will give you a really, really good base with JavaScript, arrays, objects, and working with APIs, and also introduce you to some concepts like asynchronous programming, the fetch API, other things. So if you can build this thing, you'll have a really solid foundation for what's next. And what is next? React. Why React? This is the most popular front-end library out there by far, wildly far, right? So you want to learn React, and I also think you want to learn Next.js. So once you've got the basics of JavaScript down by building that project that I just talked about, it's time to move on to some frameworks. So React has become the industry standard for building user interfaces. Next.js allows you to add some backend functionality. It allows you to get into full stack land much quicker. So I personally would use Next.js. I know a lot of people are saying it's too cutting edge or it's not widely adopted yet. It's going to be widely adopted. It's being widely adopted at this point. Massive companies are making the switch to Next.js. Gap is now using Next.js. OpenAI was using Next.js. They've now switched to Remix.js. Even at Clorox, the big old company that I was just at, they were starting to use Next.js. So no, it's not so cutting edge that nobody's using it. You really want to learn Next.js for a variety of reasons, but especially because it will allow you to go full stack quicker. So here's what you do. Recreate that app that you just made in the previous step using React. This time, you also want to add some dynamic routes. You want to make a multi-page web app. So maybe you make that same kind of social media clone, but this time you want to be able to go between pages. So maybe you go to a certain post by the page, or maybe you'll have a about us page and a home page and some other page. Have a footer, have a header, have them be persistent across the entire app. So replicating this project should lead you to understand some things like use state, use effect, maybe the context API, maybe Redux, but I don't think you have to learn that. If you want to get the bare minimum to be hireable, I don't think you need Redux, or I don't think you need to know the context API, but I know it would certainly help. And you may just run into cases where you're like, well, how do I transfer data from one page to the other page? You should get led into interesting rabbit holes by building these projects. Building a multi-page app where data can be transmitted from one page to the other should lead you down some interesting rabbit holes and lead you to some very, very common ways to fix these problems. Here's the thing. None of the things that you're going to encounter haven't been solved at least 1,000 times over. So through a combination of Googling and just getting into these little places where you get stuck, you're going to learn a lot. In fact, that should be your goal. That's my goal when I'm building what I'm going to build with my data engineering idea in mind, right? I'm looking for instances where I get stuck, don't know what the heck I'm doing, and then I got to figure it out because I know that's where the real learning occurs. So that's where your real learning will occur. Don't look for tutorials that are going to show you exactly how to do it on the first try and never show you all the mistakes they made. Those aren't really great ways to learn, if I'm being honest, because you look what they did and you don't get the WTF moment. You're like, what the hell? I don't get how this works. And you bang your head against the screen and you cry and you go home. And then you finally figure it out and you feel like the smartest person in the world. And none of your friends care because they're busy watching football or whatever. They don't understand the power of fixing a bug at midnight when you've been grinding all day trying to figure it out. So anyway, you're getting stuck with React. You're getting stuck with Next.js. You can't quite figure it out. Eventually you will. You'll build the same app you built and you'll add multi-page functionality. Step 3, get comfortable with databases, because you need a way to store and manage the data in your app. This is where databases come in. I think you should actually start with SQL. It's used basically everywhere, and it's actually a little easier to learn than MongoDB, which is my second choice. We teach MongoDB at Parsity, and I'm adding in some SQL, but honestly, SQL is not that hard to learn the basics of it. MongoDB, in my opinion, is much more difficult to learn than SQL. So start with SQL, learn how to write a select statement, learn how to perform a join, a left join, use aggregation functions like count and sum. Figure out how to make a few tables that will house the data from the previous step. So whether it's your to-do app or maybe it's your social media app, how do you have tables and data which can represent that same data that you already have located in the front end? You want to store it somewhere where it doesn't just disappear when the user refreshes the screen, which is a problem you should have encountered by now. So you have data, you press submit on this form, and you capture the data, you store it in an array or something. You have an array full of objects. Well, what happens when the person refreshes the screen? All that data goes away. So how do you store that data infinitely, forever? You use a database. So use SQL. And if you don't want to use SQL for whatever reason, if you've looked in your local market, if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, or you're in New York, or you're in Austin, or you're in a place with a ton of startups, maybe it makes more sense to learn MongoDB at that point. MongoDB is a great alternative. I still think SQL should be your priority if you don't live in some major tech hubs, or maybe you're not concerned about going to a startup at all. Startups tend to use MongoDB, but MongoDB is a close second when it comes to databases. So there's not really a wrong choice here. I still think SQL will be a little bit easier for you to. Oh, and by the way, I have an episode about learning SQL in a hands-on way using ChatGPT and NeonDB. A free choice for you to use SQL. I'm not sponsored, by the way, by NeonDB. I use it at work. I think it's fantastic to use. And I have an episode that I'll link in the show notes as well if you're interested in learning in that hands-on way. And that episode in the show notes also has a step-by-step guide on learning SQL. Now we're at step 4. You need to add authentication. Authentication is probably the most challenging part of building an app, but it's essential. So here's my advice. You should build a simple login system yourself. Learn how sessions work, learn how JSON web tokens work, and then make a login system that uses sessions or JSON web tokens or both. Now, in reality, you shouldn't do this. You should not build your own login system. Logins expose all sorts of private information. In fact, sometimes they call it PII, personally identifiable information. I think that's what it stands for. Anyway, this is super, important stuff. Different countries have different restrictions on how you can keep it. What if you store the passwords without hashing them? Somebody could crack your password really simply and like go and log into all sorts of other accounts under your email. You don't really want to do this, right? You should do this to learn it. So you should learn how to roll your own authentication system using some of the stuff I just mentioned, JSON Web Tokens or sessions. And then you should switch to a real solution like Auth0 or Clerk or NextAuth. Next.js has some auth that comes out of the box. Use one of those solutions instead, I beg of you, because you don't really want to be responsible for people's passwords or getting sensitive data out there and leaking it out to the world. That will be terrible. Okay, so the next step, you have auth, you have your tables, you need to get all this meshed together, right? You want your app, so when a person clicks submit and they want to submit their social media post or they want to add a to-do, it adds it to the database and then it is reflected on the screen in real time. So they click something, something happens, the data is stored in the database. You should have a way for a person to read, update, and delete that data. So they can create it, they can read it, they can update it, they can delete it. What does that look like in practice? On the form, they create the data by adding in this certain information. If the information is invalid, the form should not submit. So if they don't have the title, or they don't have an image, or they don't have something that's really, really important for the social media app, then you shouldn't let them submit. There should be some sort of validation on the form, really important. Once they can submit the valid information, it's stored in a database. And then on the next page they go to where they can look at all their to-dos or all their social media posts, they should be able to see all their different posts, but only theirs. Because what if there's another 1,000 users on the app? Maybe they should have the ability to toggle the display so they can be private or public. And if it's public, it'll go on the public page. If it's private, it's only showed on their private page. This would be an interesting little challenge for you to try to pick up. And then they should be able to update it. Maybe they made something public that should have been private. Maybe they marked it to do as completed when it shouldn't have been completed. They should be able to update this data and have it reflect in the UI, the user interface, the screen that they're looking at, your beautiful app. And finally, they should be able to delete this stuff. They need to be able to delete that post or that to-do or whatever. They should be able to wipe it out of the database and it should be able to never be found ever again. It should be deleted permanently from the database, and on the UI, it should disappear from view. Finally, time to deploy your app. You want to show off your work. You need to deploy it online. Since you're using Next.js, because I told you should be using Next.js, and hopefully you are, this should be really, really simple. With a click of a button, you can deploy your app to Vercel. Now, I didn't actually mention Git and GitHub. I didn't mention a lot of other little things you're going to have to learn along the way. This is the kind of stuff you'll just figure out as you're building it, right? Like there's no way to deploy your app without using Git and GitHub. So in order for you to deploy your app in Vercel, you need to have that code in GitHub somewhere, and you need to have all sorts of environment variables to connect to your database, and they have to be secure, and GitHub will yell at you if they're not secure, and there'll be some things that will cause some blunders and some friction along the way. Speaking of blunders and friction, using Vercel is actually too easy, way too easy. You don't want to take the easy path on this stuff because that's not what's going to make you hireable. Because ultimately what you want to show an employer or be able to talk about are the problems you encountered. One of the most common questions you're going to get is, tell me about a difficult project you work on. Tell me about a technically complex project you worked on. And what was some of the biggest mistakes you made? You want to have an answer for this kind of stuff. So deploy it on Vercel and then think, where else should I deploy it? And I think you should deploy it on Amazon Web Services, without a doubt. AWS is the most used cloud provider out there, and you're going to be using it at some point in your career. Try to deploy this same app on AWS. You are going to go through hell getting this thing out, but you're going to learn a ton. We're getting close to the end here. So the next thing you should do is build something meaningful. This is step 6. Build something you actually care about. So take the training wheels off. You should be building a capstone project. It should solve a real problem. It should be full stack, and it should be secure, and it should be accessible online for anyone in the world to view. A student at Parsity recently built an inventory tracker for a family business. It wasn't just like this portfolio project, which I think is completely overemphasized in most boot camps, this whole portfolio thing, which I think is honestly silly. This thing that he built was used in their daily operations. So a project like this stands out because it actually delivers real value, and you can write about it online, and it's interesting. It's way more interesting than saying I built a to-do app. Everybody's built a to-do app. It's way more interesting than saying I deployed a movie finder. everybody's built a movie finder or a Netflix clone or whatever. If you find a real world project to build that's going to help somebody, that is much more interesting. And you can even turn that into a small business potentially if you really wanted to do this. Now, it's hard to find people that will let you build something meaningful. So first build something meaningful for yourself. So you get your hands dirty and you get used to rolling some different authentication. Maybe you use SQL at first. Now you want to use MongoDB. This should take you around 2 to 3 months actually to build this kind of thing. I think the other few steps, if you're doing them at a semi-aggressive pace, like I'm, working a couple hours a day, maybe 10 to 20 hours per week, I think you can get those done within 3 to 6 months. 6 months would be the maximum that I'd hope you'd get that done. And then I think the capstone project could take you another 2 to 3 months, maybe 1 month if you're being really, really aggressive building it, because this should be full stack. It should be solving a real problem. You have to think through it. You're going to have to make it look pretty good. You're going to have to style it and have all the functionality that you need. And that can take a long time. And it's really hard to do this too, because you can go as far deep as you want to. My suggestion would be to build the minimally viable version of this one. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 features, pick 1 or 2 that you must have and only build those, and have the new features or the next features come out in subsequent releases. So you don't need to build the final version at first. You just need to build the most minimally viable version of it that somebody can actually use that has some sort of authentication. That's it. Now that alone could take you between 1 and 3 months. Okay, and here's the very last step. This is step 7. You need to gain experience. This is the biggest complaint I see from people online saying, I can't get hired. No one will hire me at all. I'm not saying that getting experience is going to be the silver bullet, because there are people with 10 years of experience that still have a hard time getting hired. There's people with 1 year of experience that have an easier time getting hired, but getting experience will make you more attractive on the job market. So how do you do this? I've gone over this in other episodes. Offer to build something for free. Look for entrepreneurs or small businesses that need help. Make sure they actually have a business. Go on Reddit, go on LinkedIn, go on Instagram. Say, hey, I'm willing to build you something for free, but only if you have an LLC, right? So when you meet them, see, do they have an LLC? Can I put that little badge next to my name on LinkedIn? And can I actually call myself a contractor in this case, or say I'm a consultant, or say I'm doing something that I work for this company? If so, great. Because I don't think you actually want to put freelancer anymore. That used to be my go-to advice, and I've changed that since then. I don't think you want to put freelance web developer because it doesn't sound real anymore. Too many people have tried that out. So instead, you put, I'm a consultant because you are, or I'm just a web developer or software engineer at this company because you are. Doesn't matter if you're getting paid or not to do it. No one's going to ask you, well, did you get paid to build that website? They don't care. They said, oh, so you worked at this place? Yeah, I did. What did you do? Well, I did X, Y, and Z. I built the first version of this product for this company. And now that you've been employed as a software engineer, it's much easier to keep getting employed as a software engineer, especially if you're coming from a very non-traditional background, like a French fry chef, or maybe you were fixing cars, or maybe you were a lawyer or something like that. It doesn't really matter. You're still coming in this game with a little bit of bias attached to your name. People are looking at you a little sideways, right? So in order to get over that initial suspicion, you probably want to do some work for free, but please do it for a company that actually has a logo that they will allow you to put next to your name on LinkedIn, and have them give you a recommendation when you're done with the project. I think this can take another 1 to 3 months. You want to make sure that your work is deliverable, meaning it's not going to be something that's so large that it can't be delivered. Ideally, they either have a website that's running, or they have an application that needs to have some bugs solved, or they're willing to have you kind of take the lead and offer to build them the first version of this site. It can't be something way too complicated. So you have to negotiate and make sure that you're building something that you feel comfortable with, but also that can be done within 1 to 3 months or whatever your timeline is. So this whole timeline that I've given you, all these different things to build, I think this can take up to a year. Now remember this, most people go to college for 4 years, they get out and then they go to a boot camp, or they do a lot of what I'm telling you and they take an additional year just to do that. I'm giving you a roadmap that can reasonably take you around a year to do if you do it fairly aggressively. And if you follow this roadmap, you're not only going to learn how to code, you're going to learn how to solve problems, build valuable tools, showcase your abilities in a way that actually gets you hired. Now, if that sounds overwhelming, because I know it does, you could listen to this episode, you could write down everything I've said, and you could still feel like, oh, am I really going to do all this stuff? Honestly, that's the reason why most people just choose to go to a boot camp or a college or hire a mentor. And if you're interested in doing this exact path, but with me and a senior engineer as your mentor along this entire process with a career coach, basically, we've just taken away all the different variables and says, here is the path that we've laid out for you with people that are going to help you go through it one step at a time with a curriculum that takes you through it one step at a time. Just join Parsity. I mean, yeah, that's what I would probably do. I would join Parsity. I would hire somebody. I would have somebody to take me through each of these steps on my own. And that way I could reach the promised land faster and with more confidence that I'm actually doing the things I should be doing. I hope that's helpful, whether you go to Parsity or hire a mentor or do whatever. You don't need to. If you follow that path, I guarantee you're going to be headed for success. Always hope that's helpful. See you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.